Mike and Mike is brought to you by Uber. Want to make more money? Drive with Uber. Earn great money when you want on your schedule. You've already got a car and a license. Use them to start earning serious, life-changing money today. Sign up to drive with Uber. Visit drivewithuber.com. That's drivewithuber.com. Ricky tweets at me, if you don't care about the FedEx playoffs, you can't call yourself a true golf fan. No. Well, Ricky, with all due respect, why don't you worry about what you worry about, and I'll worry about what I worry about.
Ridiculous.
And then Anthony tweets, my sister-in-law called me for the first time in years to tell me about Justin Verlander's no-hitter. I knew then it was jinxed.
Oh.
Within 10 minutes, it was all over. Okay, so here we go. I don't know this person. I believe you do.
Oh, yeah.
You know Bud Foster? I've never met him in my life.
Bud Foster, I mean, one of the best defensive coordinators in all of football for years. He has turned down other jobs to stay with Frank Beamer at Virginia Tech to be the D coordinator, and always just has such a tough, strong, good defense.
He happens to be the highest paid assistant football coach in the country. He makes $1.356 million, which is $6,000 more than Kirby Smart makes at Alabama. And then you got Cam Cameron and a few other fairly well-known names of assistant coaches. These were last year's salary. So I don't know what his salary is this year. It's probably somewhat similar. And you've probably heard the story recently in a story that we all celebrated, that the NCAA voted to redefine athletic scholarships. So they covered not only the cost of tuition, room and board and books and things like that, but also some incidental expenses, basically giving players a little bit of extra money, a little pocket money for athletes, which I thought was a fabulous idea, and I assume you too might think was a fabulous
absolutely.
idea. At Virginia Tech, according to a story that I have here, the football players will be getting something in the neighborhood of somewhere between $3,200 and $3,600.
Right.
That's the story that I saw. In additional money, in pocket money.
Right.
It's real money.
It's money. It's something put in their pocket. Yes.
I now read you tweets from Norm Wood, who covers Virginia Tech football. He tweeted these yesterday. Hokies defensive coordinator Bud Foster, who again, for the sake of discussion, just parenthetically, happens to be the highest paid assistant coach in America, but that's not necessarily germane to the story unless you think it is. Hokies defensive coordinator Bud Foster says the coaching staff will explore fining players money from their cost of attendance funds as future disciplinary measure. Foster said some people got in trouble for having players run at 6 a.m., so fining players' cost of attendance funds has been a topic. Foster said, quote, in the real world, if you don't adhere to rules and regulations, you get fined. You get fired. We're not in a position to fire anybody right now. So you know what he was thinking about? Well, maybe we'll fine these guys from their cost of living or their additional funds. A little later in the day,
cost of attendance stipend.
Very shortly thereafter, when the world started seeing those tweets and realized this is the worst idea I've ever heard spoken by a legitimate person in a legitimate job at a legitimate football program, Andy Bitter, whose Twitter handle is @AndyBitterVT, said athletic director Whit Babcock, in a statement through a school spokesman on player fine, said, quote, it will be discontinued immediately. Now, for it to be discontinued, one would suggest that means it has to have been continued. It seems to have been, all I saw was that Bud Foster said that they were thinking of doing it.
Right.
Now they're saying it will be discontinued. So that suggests that maybe it was done. I don't know that. But what I do know is that that's the worst idea I've ever heard in my entire life. And to actually use the words, in the real world, if you don't adhere to rules and regulations, you get fired. In the real world, Bud, people get paid to do a job. You don't allow that in your sport. You don't allow that in the NCAA. I'm not even going to have that fight with you today. I've accepted the fact that I'm losing that fight until it changes, if it ever changes, and it probably won't. And that's fine. But the notion that you're going to take these players' cost of living, what did we call it again? What did you say it was called?
It's a cost of attendance
stipend. Cost of attendance stipend. And fine them that money, the fact that you make $1.3 million notwithstanding, is the worst idea and one of the dumbest things I've ever heard a person in as significant a position as he has say out loud.
Listen, I can't disagree at all from those statements. I mean, obviously, other people had to be in on the decision if this was going to happen, but, you know, these are Bud Foster's quotes about in the real world and such. So, listen, I'm a huge Bud Foster fan, but I couldn't disagree with him more here. I think this is I'm with you. It's one of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard in my life, to try and take players the cost of attendance, stipend, or whatever, some money that some of these players get for different reasons, depending on the situation you're in, and to take that money away is I don't even know where to begin on that. I can't even believe it would be a thought process. I could see in a large meeting, in an ideas meeting, somebody just kind of throwing that out. Hey, they get stipend money. Why don't we take some of that? To which quickly everybody in the room should have looked and, wadded up a piece of paper and threw it at the guy and say, "Are you kidding me? That's a ridiculous idea. Let's next." That's where that should have come up and died right there. Because, you throw out all ideas. But to try and implement that, or if we don't know if it had been implemented, I'm with you. One of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard of in my life, ever, to do to a player. I'm stunned. I guess this is just a coach or multiple people, whatever, is thinking of this idea, trying to think of what's going to get through to a player, saying that they were getting in trouble for 6 a.m. runs. And I've always said that's been the punishment. You do something wrong, you're going to meet the strength coach before your classes. It's usually something that's going to involve a little bit of throwing up. But you know what? I have no problem with. To me, it's all about a deterrent. And that could deter you of something, of doing that kind of workout before you go to a class and then practice later that day, that you wouldn't want to do it anymore. But this idea is ridiculous. It's ridiculous. They're not paid. We're talking about a stipend they get. They're not paid for a living. It's not the real world in there. They're not paid for. There are no tax forms being filled out and all that kind of deal. This is a stipend they get, and you want to take some of that away. I mean, listen, we're happy it got shot down, but even to get to the point of being discussed publicly means it went way, way too far.
Well, I'd be curious to see what it meant by it will be discontinued immediately. Again, in order to discontinue something, you have to have done it. We'll find out. Coming up, a headline that got very little attention yesterday was, in my opinion, the first step toward an enormous fundamental change in sports as we know them. I'm not kidding. I'll explain next.